Should Christians vote? Just how involved in public civic duty should a Christian be? Jeremiah 29:11 gets a lot of attention. For I know the plans that I have for you, plans not to harm you, but to prosper you. But just 4 verses before that, God makes it clear in Jeremiah 29:7 that we should be involved in the matters of our city, because where there is welfare in our city, there is welfare for us. Where's the balance? Here to unpack this complicated topic with me is CEO of Skywatch Television, Joe Horn. Welcome to the Donna Howell Show.
It's good to be here, Donna. This is kind of overdue, isn't it?
Yes.
We've talked a lot about doing shows where I think the last time I was here was maybe the pilot or right at the time of the pilot. And congratulations on the success. You're getting a ton of social media interaction. I understand you've got some people that bless you every day by emailing you and
Yes.
keeping up to date with the program. And
Yes, I do actually have one blessed, beautiful lady that prays for me every day and writes me constantly. And actually, she has sent me this gorgeous necklace along with 5 others. So I've been very blessed. Yeah, the feedback has been really a blessing.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It looks handmade. And of course, it's almost like she knows your style. It just matches so well.
She knows I go for the boho chic thing, yeah. I'd like to start by reading verbatim Jeremiah 29:7. Seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. Something about this, it more than just insinuates civic duty. And yet, at the time of this recording, we are just days from the election. It just ended a couple of days ago.
Yeah, post the 2024 presidential election.
Right. And I know that there's a lot of Christians that are very excited about Trump. There's been kind of a slew of like TikTok videos and different things being posted by people who are God-fearing folks. Some of them are humorous, some of them are very serious, but a lot of people are coming forward and saying, don't think that just because Trump is a president now, that your civic duty is done. I mean, don't think that now you can just sit back, relax, sit on your laurels or your sit bones or whatever, and think, whew, it's over, I don't have to do anything else. This is only just the beginning of our responsibility as God-fearing people to be involved in civic duty, not necessarily being involved in politics to the extreme that you would stand behind a pulpit and preach who to vote for, but standing behind your pulpit and boldly speaking for the legislation of the times and the civic duty that we would have in bringing about what is closer to a godly nation than otherwise without our involvement. What do you think?
That is a very loaded question. It might be the most loaded question anyone has ever leveraged at me the way that you did, because kind of can't just leverage that question without then creating a bunch of sub-caveats and bullet points that would then fall under various categories of that line between civic duty and then something that our Father often taught us as his children to be concerned about, called dominionism.
Right.
This idea that someone makes the purpose of the church, the platform, the pulpit, now exists to try to get their congregation to go push voting levers that push forth righteous legislation. Because as benevolent as that sounds, if you're an evangelical, we know that that might actually play into an antichrist system at some point, right?
Of course.
Christians turning on different factions of Christianity, or those being deceived that are embracing what is the mark of the beast system totally unaware, and doing it all from, a religious world order that believes that, very much like the Pharisees that petition to have Christ crucified, that we're chasing down the last remnant of the actual body of Christ in the name of doing something righteous and holy because we've unknowingly become Pharisees in our day, in our time. When you say, what do you make of something like this most recent election? Did Christians do the right thing? You can't really just take that question, volley it out there, and get like one simple answer. And I'll give you an example of this. There was a time, and I know I'm going to make some people very mad about this. I remember under George Bush Jr., when we were running Raiders News Network, 20 years ago, 2004. We very much applauded his presidential administration after 9/11 when we invaded Afghanistan because we believed the narrative that we were going after terrorists responsible for their attack here on U.S. soil.
Yeah.
But right after that, you saw this invasion of Iraq based on the supposition that they knew where more weapons of mass destruction under Saddam Hussein were sitting.
Right.
And that we had to be preemptive now. This idea of preemptive war to us, talking about my family, was totally insane. Mm-hmm. That you would attack a country that has yet to attack you based on the fear that they might at some point, and you don't produce any tangible evidence to the entire country? Now, you're going to have some people watching this that are going to have so many problems with what I just said. Again, I'm asserting my views on this. There will be people who say, well, we've been in war times many times. It's not up for the federal government or the army or the military or anything else to go on CNN and tell you what they're up to. You don't show your hand. But even in the post-event of this, many of us were never satisfied that they actually had intelligence that weapons of mass destruction were ever produced, that there were any schemes or plots to do anything against the United States. And I'm looking back at Dick Cheney, companies like Halliburton, all the money that these giant oil drilling companies stood to make from the invasion of Iraq. And I thought the idea of preemptive war, the Patriot Act, was absolutely insane. But why do I bring that up? Because at the time, George Bush Jr. was enormously popular with evangelicals. Mm-hmm. And I remember at Raiders News Update, Dad experienced what he described as a massive exodus of self-identified Christian readers, took tremendous heat with Dr. Thomas Horn for being very vocal about his need to kind of separate his ministry and his identity from what was happening under George Bush Jr. politics. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And man, the scathing retaliation that he experienced. Massive numbers of Christians started boycotting Raiders News Update. They were emailing in droves. And
I remember all of this.
Now, here was the funny thing. We picked up a bunch of Democrats. People that self-identified as independents and Democrats started following Raiders News Update. And that's not why we did it. It wasn't a political stunt.
Right.
But that number of people that found us now as a credible source of news or somebody balanced, hey, it's a Christian organization, but they're actually capable of calling out a Republican when they think that there's fallacy abroad.
Right.
Right?
Right.
I remember they were talking at the time digital angel technology. This was so
yeah.
At the time seemed impossible. But anyway, you asked me about this most recent election. I'm providing you with an example of a time that my family is very much on record of not just blindly pulling the Republican lever,
right,
just because he was a Republican and said with his lips, paid lip service to conservative ideas. And to this day, I still think that up till that time, George Bush Jr. was one of the most alarming and concerning presidents we'd ever had in the country. And when I say that to my Christian friends to this day, they've forgotten all these details. And they're kind of shocked by that. They're kind of shocked that I, as a Christian, could even utter the words that we had a Republican at some point that wasn't a person that we were behind.
Right.
What do you mean? You're supposed to fall in line with the party. So you can see,
right,
if evangelicals aren't careful, just pulling down a party line could actually support eventually an antichrist system.
Well, the antichrist system, it's absolutely, irrefutably, irreversibly a theocracy. And so it is absolutely a blending of religion and social civics and political ideas. All of that comes together under one mega man in the end of times. And what you're essentially asserting, and I completely agree, is that if we vote based on, not on moral conviction, not on what we feel to be the legislation that we want to see that can more support a godly nation, a moral nation, but vote based on political biparties, colors, red versus blue, that essentially that is a very lemming thing to do because you're not actually reading what you're participating in. You're not even looking at what you're voting for. You're just pulling a red lever. And that is the exact same kind of a mindset that will blindly follow the Antichrist system. I know that you had said that already, but I kind of wanted to break it down and remind people the end is a theocracy. And by the way, a lot of Christians, I don't know why this is the case, but a lot of Christians assume that in the end days, you are going to have all of the other world religions, the pagans of the world are going to be a part of the Antichrist system, but all the Christians will know better. But the truth of the matter is, and I don't have time to get into this at length right now, another show for another time, Christians will be one of the largest religions or religious practices that will be a part of the Antichrist system. Well, how do you go from being a conservative Christian now to embracing the Antichrist system later? How will you not recognize that? Part of the great deception is going to be
Absolutely.
a lemming, mindless system. I'm not calling Christians lemmings. I'm saying that in the future, when that day arrives, the Christian church will split into two. You'll have the remnant. This is exactly what Revelation describes. You'll have the remnant over here, and you will have the other dominionistic,
The totally apostate
theocratic,
church.
the apostate church over on this side, and it will be very political. So part of the deception is that we are going to mindlessly wander into voting booths and pull levers because of the fact that we identify as some kind of a political bi-party.
Right. When I woke up this last Wednesday morning, the day after the election, of course I knew the results because I stayed up till 3 a.m. I was struck by two very extreme emotions. Okay? One, I was elated to see that God had spared us from a Kamala Harris presidency. Elated. I took it as he may be showing us a season of grace. Now, we don't know what we don't know. We're not in January. Donald Trump has yet to be sworn into office and take over the varying levers. Christians that take issue with me being public about that, what are some of the things I've heard? Well, he's an immoral person. He uses profanity. And what I assert is, first of all, I am not going to defend every tweet that Donald Trump puts out there.
Of course not.
But I want to distinguish a couple of things. I am not voting for my pastor.
Right.
And I am not voting for my children's moral compass.
Boy, I am not voting for my pastor. That is so profound.
I'm
Yes.
not asking Donald Trump to be my spiritual advisor. I'm not asking him to discern for me what I see with my own eyes and ears in terms of a political landscape. I've not agreed with every move that he's ever made, but let me tell you what he did in the first term that he had the presidency that I very much have been very vocal about, that I hope that he does again and believe that he will, is getting control over the absolute madness at the southern border. Okay, that doesn't make me a racist. Let me tell you what has happened under this open border policy. You've signaled to the entire world to send families over, coyotes with children that aren't even theirs. These children end up now, over 322,000 of them in the last 3.5 years have come up completely disappeared. Here in the United States, they have no chain of custody. Nobody's looking for them. Most of the experts agree they're probably already into forced prostitution, sex trafficking. So Joe Horn, the American citizen, says that is a massive catastrophe. This is going to stop immediately.
And that's only one tiny little byproduct of what you're talking about with the border.
So again, to do the best I can with the choices that I have to preserve as much of a conservative worldview that I hold
Right.
with the options that I have. When I have one party that I believe is the party of gender mutilation for children, open borders, defund the police, lawlessness, anti-First Amendment, the suppression of speech over things like how we handle a pandemic or what your political ideas are, a party that has telegraphed they want to take away a Second Amendment, my right to protect my family in the middle of the night if some wildly sadistic person busts through my front door. That's one party. That's not me listening to the mainstream media or becoming a Trumpian, talking point ditto head, as people affectionately used to call themselves when they followed Rush Limbaugh. They were considered ditto heads. I'm not a ditto head to any conservative talking point delivering person out there. This is me discerning what is going on in my country. So I'm being very public now, and I'm also very careful because, again, coming up under Dr. Thomas Horn, Dad's relationship to politics, he was a deep thinker, and you know that he wrote many, many books like Shadowlands and Saboteurs.
We Are Legion.
We Are Legion. And then he published others like, Lieutenant Colonel Robert McGinnis, an advisor to the Pentagon. He many books, Defender Publishing, many books on the dangers of communist China and their relationship with Russia and the collapsing of the dollar to bring in digital currency, to bring us to a place where, we have a one world order and a new global government. Like Defender Publishing, Tom Horn, this went on for decades. On the other hand, he always said, privately his relationship to politics when it came to voting was, I'm going to go vote my conscience every couple of years between a midterm and a presidential election.
Mm-hmm.
And the rest of the time, I'm going to do what actually drives the outcome that we're all hoping and praying for in the first place, and that is be involved in evangelism. I'll give you an example, because I said a moment ago, I woke up with two very profound thoughts following the election. So the first one was elation.
Okay.
At the idea that God had spared us from what I believe was going to be the biggest assault we'd ever seen as Americans on the church. But the second one was, I couldn't join all of my Christian friends in their total celebration of the election results, because here in Missouri what happened was we actually passed Amendment 3, which has extended abortion access to many, many people now that didn't have it prior to last week. And if you read a lot of the subtext, I'm not going to get into the details, but you can go read Amendment 3, 2024, State of Missouri. There's a lot of very unsettling aspects of what it also does in terms of opening up lines of conversation. Young children now, surgical options to visit what gender they do or don't identify with, kind of the massaging of that narrative that I just talked about. And here we are in the Bible Belt. Woohoo! We won the White House and the Senate and maybe the House at the time of this recording. And I didn't see a lot of emotions matching that excitement with the devastating reality that here in the Bible Belt, where in my view we have no excuse whatsoever. We were one of, if not the first state that made this move that sets the state up to become the first since the fall of Roe versus Wade to overturn its near total abortion ban. And I brought this up so I would get the statistics. It was precisely 51.6% of voters voted yes. Here in the Bible Belt, we have churches in between every 7-Eleven. I mean, you go to the smallest town anywhere.
Right. Yeah.
Where there's, two horses, a local tavern, they're going to have two churches. Like there's churches literally everywhere. Arizona approved a ballot measure that would establish a fundamental right to abortion and prohibit the state from restricting or banning abortion before 24 weeks. 24 weeks. Florida, Nebraska, and North Dakota did not pass abortion legislation. And we're not even in this episode talking about the foster care system or anything else, but what I'm talking about specifically is how Christians need to understand that you cannot make America great again while we're still murdering a genocide of nearly or slightly over 1 million babies a year. I am telling you in my spirit, and God's been dealing with me on this for the last several years in the lead up to the forthcoming television series that we may talk about soon called Rescue Us. For those that aren't familiar and may not see the series elsewhere, in case you don't know, it's a 6-part series that we just finished at Defender Investigative Films. It'll be coming out in November 17th, and it basically illuminates much of what I'm talking about now in terms of the children that are missing from the border, also from the foster care system with no chain of custody, no one looking for these kids, often classified by organizations of the government like the FBI as runaway for a lack of better information to determine where they might have gone. And they're so overburdened that they're not even able to follow through with all of the kids that are missing, the ones that are being replaced over and over and over again in homes where there have been known accusations. These kids are statistically guaranteed to experience at least 5 to 6 types of abuse. This is a system that's overburdened. Predators know this, so they're taking advantage of systems like the foster care system. It is literally an epidemic, and it is a very silent one that I think much of the church is either A, completely uninformed about, B, when they are informed about it, it's just too uncomfortable. It's not my ministry, Lord. Send somebody else. I can't. Ooh, that's dark. Ooh, that's tough. Or C, they're apathetic. Lord, I really pray that you would do something about that. That's too bad, man. Anyway, what's going on at the coffee spot? So while I am thrilled that God appears to have given maybe even a temporary moment of delay or grace in this country, that he has spared us from what would have likely been a disastrous continuum of what we've already seen from the Biden-Harris administration. I want Christians to understand we've not voted in a new revival.
No.
Can we
Thank
just deal with
you.
that? Does that make sense?
Yes. Go.
Having a revival, now let's deal with this for a second. Having revival almost usually follows massive suppression. Your laws being deployed where your rights are being taken away from you. You know, the Apostle Paul considered it a great joy to be locked away where he could evangelize the guards and the fellow prisoners, and considered his suffering for Christ a great opportunity. When you see God move, a lot of times it's when the church is under its most intense points of attack. Mm-hmm. It sobers you up. You feel you have no other option. It's literally, Jesus Christ is my only hope. And if I don't tell my neighbors, they're going to lose their lives. Like, it's do or die, right? You can see this all throughout the Bible, over and over and over again. And then Israel forgot the Lord their God, and there was famine and drought, and then they remembered the Lord their God, and there was feasts, and there was prosperity, and then they forgot, and then they remembered. You can see this over and over again. So again, we did not just vote in revival. Let me tell you something. For the left, I am not one of these who's drinking liberal tears. I think it's the most annoying construct on planet Earth right now that you would have Christians out there on social media taking great pleasure in the suffering of the left. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
There's baseball hats and T-shirts, drinking liberal tears, and they're sharing these, Democrats who for them they believe the world is over. Adolf Hitler was just elected. All of your freedoms are going away in January. The world is at an end. It's going to be nothing but a Holocaust. This is their belief, and it's because the mainstream propaganda machine has literally pushed this down their throats without reprieve. A lot of these people didn't have, parents that were able to sit with them and kind of create an endurance in their perspective that could see through a lot of the propaganda. And for them, this is the end of the world. And so I find it very annoying and destructive when Christians now salivate over their suffering. What is that in your spirit? What is that in your spirit that would take pleasure in the suffering of someone who you should probably view as a victim
No doubt.
of terrible, terrible indoctrination, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
For them, this is real. This is absolute. They're screaming. They're losing their minds on TikTok. Some of them are just putting a camera on them and they're just wailing. We did not start a revival with an election, but we need to be sympathetic and where we can, be persuasive to the people that are now lost. Like, have a conversation with them. Listen, I know that for you right now, the planet has come to an end. Mussolini, Tojo, Hitler, they all rolled into one. He just got the way. And you're disenfranchised from your own country. You're not even sure what planet you're living on. Because this time they're not selling the Russian propaganda. This for a lot of the left now, Democrats are looking at this and they'll at least acknowledge right now that this was not like a stolen election. So that creates like a bigger disbelief. How in the world as a country did we get here? We actually voted for totalitarian control. We actually voted for the full breakdown of global peace to ignore science. The global warming / cooling holocaust that's 10 years from here, that we only had a razor's shot at maybe overcoming is off the table. You have to understand that for these people, this is reality. We're all going to be dissolved in global warming. Where the Arctic's falling. Sea levels are rising and falling. And relax and take a breath. Let's talk about the fact that he was in office for 4 years, and he didn't bring about world wars. In fact, he stopped a bunch of them. The rhinos and the establishment had started and had planned to keep going probably forever. And just try to talk reason. I know that there's people watching this right now. They're like, well, this guy, he's delusional if he thinks he can be persuasive. I actually had some very productive conversations this year where I wasn't pushy at all, where people that had been lifelong self-identified. I said, one of my friends, I said, you were a lifelong Democrat, right? And she said, no, worse. These are her words. She said, I was a lifelong liberal. And, this year she gave her life to the Lord. And she's seeing a huge growth in her children, a huge growth in herself. And again, this is a testament to the power of the gospel rather than pulling voting levers. When the conversation was ripe, when the Lord was ready in his timing for her to have these questions, and she was curious, and I had a relationship, a position in her life where she knows my wife and I. We've never pushed our beliefs. We've just been gentle and loving, patient. We've cared about her children. They were running fevers. We were their friends, you see. And now she's given her life to the Lord and voted Donald Trump this year. Now, the rest of the party line, she went libertarian. She doesn't trust all of the Republicans, but she understood the contrast between some of the options we've been talking about. Mm-hmm. And again, I hope I'm being clear. And I would say if there's a way to collapse this from where I'm coming from, and then you can ask me anything else you want if it feels like I'm dithering and rambling. To me, Christians do have an obligation to vote.
Yes.
And I would argue it this way. I would say, look, one of the most common things that you hear Christians recite when they provide you for a reason that they didn't vote is because God is in control. Okay? It's very, very convenient.
Very common.
How do you argue with that? God's in control. Well, crud. I would ask you just a couple of questions, and again, I don't mean to sound sarcastic or condescending, but do you have a front door on your home? Do you have a front door on your home? Do you have groceries in your cupboards? Do you pay your electric bill? Let me back up. What in the world? Why do you have a front door on your home? If God is in control, why close and lock a front door at night? Are you concerned that maybe someone that you don't permit would come in and do something malevolent with one of your children, or maybe you yourself? Why? God's in control. Leave the door open. Take it off the hinges. You don't need a door. Did you buy groceries that you knew would last you for 4 or 5 days? Why did you do that? Do you lack faith? Do you lack faith? God's going to supply all of your needs. He's in control. Why did you buy groceries? Well, because you knew you'd have to eat for the next 2 or 3 days. Why? Because I believe that it is common sense that people understand that God puts us in a position to be responsible stewards over what He's given us to be custodians of. A great example of this is our children. Why would someone put away provisions to make sure that they had care or food should the power go out? Why do you buy candles or extra batteries? Or is this making sense?
Yeah, and
God is in control.
As you're talking,
why would you do any of this?
I'm sitting there remembering the verse that the man that does not take care of his home, his family first, is worse than an infidel.
That's right.
And a lot of people, the word infidel in today's culture sounds like it's synonymous to idiot or moron, but actually that word means non-believer. You're literally worse than a non-believer. You're worse than somebody who is just completely agnostic or atheistic toward God if your attitude towards your husband or wife or children doesn't come first. So that's what's going through my mind as I'm sitting here listening to you talk about this very, very common, very obvious, and very logical way of protecting your own first.
Well, so again, when you ask me, do Christians have a moral obligation to vote? There's a couple of reasons why I think they do. And again, I'm not telling them who to vote for. Frankly, if the pulpit was doing a great job, like you and I've talked about, in pushing real life meat and bone gospel issues rather than much of the entertainment that takes place today, with feeling good and edifying oneself and being promised prosperity and all the good feels of what it is to walk with Jesus. If they would actually get back to the preaching of the truth of the gospel, the hard stuff, where God is in disaster, where God is in suffering, where He is in the midst of your lost loved one, the actual biblical gospel, I think that would influence the way that people vote. But there's another very important reason I would assert that Christians have a moral obligation to vote. And that is, it's an opportunity. As long as you can keep the United States a free republic, which is what it is, you have this opportunity to vote and make your morality known in terms of the way that you're pulling levers. And it is an opportunity afforded to you by those that have come before you and literally given their lives. Talking about the great men and women who have served this country through terrible times of war and have given everything so that now you have the opportunity to exercise your free right to vote and hopefully keep your republic. Now, if we lose it, I'm still not in a position where I'm going to start crying, the sky is falling, game over. If our politics eventually implode, if we lose our constitutional rights as Americans, which is basically guaranteed to take place at some point under the Antichrist system, you will probably see the greatest time of revival because of that heavy, heavy assault. It will drive people to their knees, their desperate need to cling on to their last hope, their only hope in their view, Jesus Christ.
Well, and I think that that's actually what some people would interpret this last election to have been. Just a continual,
Yeah.
both political and non-political, social influx recently of moral this or that people in the church would say is moral depravity. And they interpret this last election to have been, we had a revival, fell on our knees. And don't forget, last October, okay, it was actually predicted by major news media and several times that the then upcoming election, would see a cessation of anywhere between 32 to 45 million evangelical voters. That the Christians are just not going to vote this year at all.
Yeah, for context, that would have been a historical, almost non-existent showing of evangelicals.
Right. Well, and I'm grateful. I'm very grateful to see that did not happen. But and that they did show up. That's essentially, has a lot to do with the election results that we're looking at now. But I do believe that there are people that you and I both know and have been friends with for a long time that take the God is in control. I'm not going to vote if it's just a lesser of two evils. It's still evil. I don't want to participate in the evil of the world. I am in the world, not of the world. Render unto Caesar what is Caesar. Give the government its coin, and then get back to, the gospel. And I understand why there are so many people that would take that approach. We are in the world, not of the world. Some people will stress that so far that being in but not of the world means you cannot participate and should not participate in any duty of any kind of secular origin. If it's secular, you have nothing to do with it. But the Bible verse does express that we are in the world. That's the part that gets forgotten.
Right.
So much emphasis is being put on make sure that you live separately from the world.
Right.
But it doesn't suggest be so separatist from the world
Right.
that you can no longer participate in a logical way, that your human brain and your comprehension of social issues, political climate, all of those things would be put together so that you can make a decision that does contribute to biblical morality.
Yeah.
Not a theocracy, not like you said, not so-and-so is president, so now we've got a pastor for president and we're going to have a revival, but human logic to represent the legislation that you want to see happen that will make the world at least that much godlier.
Well, it goes back to what I said a minute ago about God giving us a responsibility, stewardship over the world, I think, that our kids are going to inherit.
Right.
To me, it's not a separation or even a leap at all. My moral responsibility as a father, even if you took Christianity out of the equation, which I'm not going to do, but let's just say we tabled that aspect of it, and I look at what's happening to the public school. One of the drivers behind why we pulled them the first time was because they started introducing these, I'll just call them pedophile-friendly aspects of education. And when I confronted the superintendent about it, I was basically told that this was the school's response to a bullying program. Mm-hmm. And that, I quote, parents, this is what I was told, she's telling me that parents are no longer raising their children, so we as educators feel it is our responsibility to cue them in on these areas of morality. Now, obviously, we pulled our children, and I'm simplifying a much longer story, but even if you were to just take out the part of it that had to do with Christianity, just I as an American, do I want my children having pornography in their classroom? Do I want them learning about sex when they're in the second grade? Right? Is this making sense?
Right, yeah.
So I as a father, even if I just had a conservative view of the world and didn't believe in God, which might get tricky for some of the viewers, would still, in my view, have a responsibility to go down and challenge the school and say, not my kids.
Right.
And not only that, but you guys are lunatics. This is not going to happen.
Right.
In fact, you think it's going to happen. I'm going to go above you. We're going to talk to the superintendent. And if it's coming from him, we're going to take this to Congress. We're not going to stop until there's a statewide recognition that we're not going to normalize this stuff for our kids.
Right.
Even if you weren't a Christian and saw it as an obligation or a duty to vote morality, just the common sense of the thing. So if you were to flip the script and say, well, I feel all of those things because I'm paying attention to the issues, but because I'm a Christian and I have such faith in God, I'm just going to wash my hands of it and sit back because he's in control. And it's Lucifer's system. You've got your choice between good and maybe bad, or maybe bad and even worse. And I'm just not going to vote because I don't want to be a part of a moral construct that's not edifying to Christ. Like, you don't really have a strong argument. Evil is always advancing in your communities where there is no restraint. It is always pervasive. It is always looking for open ways to pervert your school systems, to pervert your townships, to pervert your Congress and your Senate and your leaders, always. Without restrainers, it's runaway. And that's where I feel like, again, we don't want to fall into the slippery slope of dominionism, but Christians, in my view, have a massive opportunity, at the very least, to play a role in that restraining of outright evil, as it pertains especially to our children. Is that making sense?
Yes. Before we take this out, I do want to just share a few scriptures with the audience. I'm not even going to give you 100% theological breakdown of all of these in the Greek words and Hebrew words and all these things that I often do on this platform. I just want to give you a couple of verses in plain English to ruminate. Romans 13, 1 through 7. Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. That passage, including the latter verses that I did not read, ending with, give to everyone what you owe them. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor. A lot of times, Christian people tend to read this verse and assume that the only way that these verses apply is to say, make sure that you've got the balance. When the law tells you do this or that, then do this or that. But if the law goes against the word, that's when we have all of these different gray areas that we have to color in and make theological responses for. And again, that's awesome. That's wonderful. That's where to start that particular debate. But don't forget, this literally is expressing our interaction with civic duty. As parents, Proverbs 31, 8 through 9. Listen to this. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. What does it mean to speak out? What does it mean to speak up for those, whether it be your child? I always think of some of my neighbors. They're not the loudest people. They're not going to stand outside with picket signs. They're not going to storm the gate, the White House. I would love to think that we are all helping each other in smaller communities speak out for the things that we agree with. But the Bible here specifically says, speak up for those, for the rights of all those who are destitute. The idea that we would be speaking up in the beginning means that we are going to stand up and very loudly proclaim what we feel to be good and holy and righteous for these people. On the tails of that is Hebrew 10, 24 through 25. Consider how to stir up one another to love and good works. I promised I wasn't going to get into the Greek, and I won't, but stir up, it's an action, what's being described here. Consider how to stir up one another to love and to good works. Stirring up means that you are getting out there, you are being involved, you're participating in making sure that you, not just you yourself, but your community, one another toward the things that are moral and righteous and good. Proverbs 11:14, and I'll close with this. Where there is no guidance, a nation falls. But in abundance of counselors, there is safety. Where there is no guidance, a nation falls. How do you get guidance for your nation other than to participate, do your civic duty, vote when it's your time to vote? You do not have to stand behind a pulpit and tell people who to vote for, but if you are in a position where your voice is being heard, in a church with the congregation, maybe your congregation is online and you have a YouTube channel or a TikTok account and people are listening to you. When you are in a position that people are listening to you, please do not make the mistake of assuming that we do not have any business participating in politics when it comes to at least going in, signing a ballot, and having a role in being able to establish the world that we want to see. Because if we don't vote, we cannot complain. The people want to say in the church, well, you cannot legislate morality. No, but what you can do is participate as much as you can to see the legislation that you believe in, that is biblical and godly, in your responsible well-studied purview, bring that to the table, and then the rest of the time, preach the gospel. Keep preaching the gospel.
That's it.
Think about evangelism and continue to not be ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ as you continue in your daily walk forward. Because every time, it's just like Joe says, every time somebody truly and honestly feels the love of another person who can lead them to the love of God. This secular idea right now that is permeating culture in Western life is that the Bible is hate speech. Christianity is hate speech. When they experience the love of God, they are drawn in toward that morality anyway. The socio-political climate of today is constant hate, division, this group versus that group. But when you get in your mind evangelism, your voice becomes one of love. And when the voice of hate out there in everyday living is so loud, that is where the voice of love needs to get a lot louder. So please continue to pray for your country, continue to pray for our leaders, continue to engage in a moral construct for what we want to see. Thank you so much for joining me today, Joe. We will have to do this again soon. I want to have you on as soon as possible, maybe even next week, to discuss the Rescue Us docuseries, which is coming up. You're not going to want to miss that. Thank you so much for joining us.